Welcome back to Dan on Dev. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the impact of AI and AI tools on dev teams and how to use the tools well and really kind of how I'm thinking about the future and impact of AI on dev teams. So that's going to be our topic for today. We'll get started. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how AI is impacting the dev teams. And let's first talk about the tools. So the tools out there, obviously everybody knows ChatGPT, and you can go to the website and plug in questions. You can copy and paste some code into there and get some updates. You can do the same thing with Claude AI, with Google's Gemini. There's a bunch of tools out there. You also have the integrated development tools. Copilot has a plugin to like Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio as an example. And although I don't really care for that one, Claude is a good engine, but I'm not sure what's going on with Copilot. And maybe I need to give it another chance. I don't know if they've updated it recently, but I didn't enjoy it. Then there's like a fork or I don't know, maybe it's called a fork, but a fork of Visual Studio Code with Cursor. And Cursor, it basically is Visual Studio Code with an integrated AI capability. That's fantastic. There's other plugins like Klein. There's a bunch of these tools out there, and it's a moving target right now. Developers are kind of shifting around constantly. You know, ChatGPT will come out with a new model. All of a sudden, it's maybe a little better than Claude. People will try that or test it, whatever. There's all these tools. That's just the point here. There's just a bunch of tools and they're moving targets, and it's going to be moving for a while. How do these help? I have found that we really have been pushing our developers on both of my teams, my two core teams, to use these tools as much as possible. Now, fortunately, I have a group of experienced developers. I have a couple less experienced developers, but that's going to be a critical point here. The development tools in the hands of a good developer can really accelerate what they're capable of. I may stay out of the is this going to hurt jobs and all that sort of thing. Maybe I'll touch on a little. That will reduce the need for new hires if you can get more out of your existing team. It'll either reduce how many you need to accomplish what you would have accomplished, or it's going to make new goals achievable, which is actually really exciting. That's kind of how I'm trying to use this, is that our ability, when I arm my developers with good AI tools and work with them on how to use them, because it's important on how exactly you use the tools. You really need to look at what you're trying to solve. You can get the tools to deal with a lot of the minutia, which is amazing. Even as I go in there and deal with code, the ability for it to kind of whip together some changes, or, the stuff that you would normally have done with search and replace and a whole bunch of complex search and replaces or regexes. You can often have ChatGPT go in, or whatever AI tool, go in and sweep through and do those things for you, which is very helpful. I'm going to talk mostly about Cursor because Cursor is the tool I use the most. It has its own built-in AI capabilities when you get the pro version or team version, and I highly recommend it. I'm not getting it. This is not a paid advertisement, right? But I like the tool. And you can also configure it to use your accounts with Claude's backend from Alembic. You have to do a little bit of configuration to get all those done, and you have to pay extra, but sometimes you need it. Basically what you're doing is, if you haven't used these tools yourself, that's where you'll be doing your normal development. But now you have basically a chat window that you can pop up, and there's a little hotkey. You hit the Control L or Control Opt L or whatever, and all of a sudden you have a chat window, and then you can give it context. So it'll know what be looking by default at the file you're looking at, but you can also include other files. And if you give it the appropriate context, it can really go through everything and implement some changes for you. And it's really nice because you tell it what you want. It'll recommend things. It'll show you line by line where it changed the code. And then you can accept all or parts, right? You can kind of accept each individual piece. And that's kind of how I recommend using it today, is that assistant. Because if you are not watching carefully, sometimes it'll look at code that is critical, but the AI doesn't, and it'll just remove a whole chunk of code, and you're like, whoa. And so what you end up doing as a seasoned developer is kind of argue with it a little bit, or reject things that it was recommending, and then ask it a different way, right? So in that model, it's really important to understand what you're building. There are other models where you're going other ways of using it, because that model or that description, it covers an existing code base. If you're dealing with Greenfield, meaning a blank sheet of code, like blank screen. That's where it's awesome because you can describe everything. And that's actually where a plugin like Klein is really cool. And Cursor has kind of implemented some of this, but Klein was the first one that really did this well. And Klein is C-L-I-N-E. It's a plugin. And what it does, it kind of breaks it up into two parts where you have like planning mode and action mode. Planning mode, you kind of do the product manager task. You describe out exactly what it is you're trying to build, and it'll ask you questions, and it'll basically put together the spec and the details of what you want, and you kind of go back and forth in dialoguing with it. Then you switch into action mode, and it'll actually create the code. So if you're doing Greenfield or brand new starting point, that's actually really helpful because it gets a lot of the plumbing out of the way. It gets a lot of stuff started for you. That could be a real game changer. And then from then on out, now you're going into that interaction mode. And you can do that with Klein. Again, Cursor's native AI is great. Klein seems to have more context more of the time, but Klein does not come with its own AI keys. So you have to always hook it up to Alembic or ChatGPT and pay for those calls. It's not that expensive for what you get, I think. I was testing Klein one time and I did like a Greenfield test app and probably worked with it for 3 or 4 hours and spent all of about $50. For what I got out of it, that was money well spent. Actually, wait, maybe it's less. Actually, no, I funded the account with 50 and I spent maybe 15. It was nothing. And, for what I got out of it and how far I got ahead of where I thought I would have been in that same stretch of time, well worth it. So let's go back to existing code. As that's great for a Greenfield, but Greenfields happen rarely. You're interacting with code and you're having to give it context. Sometimes that is very difficult. It takes a lot of practice to include the things that you need to, because sometimes you'll include the files that are involved, but there's files that hook them up. And so you have to kind of know the files in the middle to make sure you're including everything. It can be a little bit of a task to really bring in the context properly. And so it takes some practice. So I work with the dev teams to really kind of understand, work through this. But here's where I get concerned. When I look at and think about how does this affect the junior developer? And this is actually, I think, going to be a real challenge as we move forward. When I'm doing this in the hands with senior developers, it's helping them get more done quickly. And it's not a magic bullet, right? It does not solve everything. It does not fix everything. They're still going to get things where the team comes back and says, I've been asking all the GPTs. None of them have the answer because they're in just some weird edge case land or building something, especially when you're doing innovation. The AI bots are only trained on what is known. And we're dealing with an unknown or kind of a recent bug. The AIs don't have all that much. Okay, let's go back to this junior developer. In the hands of somebody that does not have the experience, AI can really help them get a lot done, but they're not going to understand what it's doing. They're not going to understand how to have those arguments with AI to address the things that the assumptions the AI is making. They can end up with a lot of crappy code. So I am concerned. I am concerned for the industry and how folks are gonna learn, right? If they're starting to use these GPTs, these AI tools from the beginning, I don't know if they're gonna have the skills. Those hard fought and won skills. They're not gonna understand the real engineering behind software development, where they're really organizing the code properly, factoring the code so that it's clean and maintainable. I'm not sure how that's gonna play out. I really think, and I'm hoping that developers, like as they're going through university or internships and all these things, that if and where possible, they are not allowed to use the AI tools so that they can learn the fundamentals well. If they do not learn the fundamentals well, I'm a little concerned. Anyway, that's just kind of one of my topics that I kind of keep touching on. I don't know how, and I'm a little worried about the next generation and their ability to really get quality code completed. Maybe it's old school to think that. Maybe that we're going to be building in smaller components and, microservices, and maybe that becomes a cleaner model. Maybe some of these agent-to-agent protocols solve some of these pieces, or at least isolate things down to smaller chunks. Who knows? Maybe it'll be a solution. But what I would do if I were you is make sure, as you're working with your teams, understand where they are. Work closely with the junior developers, especially the ones producing a lot of code really quickly because they're using these tools. Make sure that they understand what the code's actually doing and have the ability to debug these things. And for the senior developers on the team, make sure that they don't get too caught up in their old ways, that they start incorporating the AI tools, because they will get left behind if you're not working with them and making sure that they're using the tools, that they're speeding up their processes. they will become more and more valuable with AI tools. They will sprint, they will be able to move faster, they will get more done because they'll understand fundamentally what they're doing and what AI is producing, and they'll zip through things. So anyway, that's just kind of topic for the day. AI is affecting the industry. It will change the job market for developers. It's clear. Some of these predictions that we're not going to need developers anymore. I don't buy any of that. That's still a long way off. Even if these tools are moving quickly, there is still an art to software development. There is still a need to understand the fundamentals of what's happening. We were already kind of getting away from some of that with these, a lot of shared libraries. So if you think about it, it's kind of like shared libraries or open source libraries taken to an even further extreme when the AI tool is just gathering a bunch of libraries together. Think Node, where you're just installing a bunch of different packages and then you kind of hook them all together. AI is kind of now taking that hooking up together piece and moving it further. But if those shared libraries are not well designed and well engineered and maintained by experienced developers, then you can't do that. And so that's where I think the real experienced developers are going to help out. So use the tools. I'm using them all the time, but understand the limitations. They are not going to solve everything, but they're going to speed your team up. And it is fun to think about your ability to think and dream bigger and push the team to think and dream bigger about what your product can be, what it is that you're building, right? For external or internal customers, what is it that you're building and how can you now do more and take it further faster? That gets exciting. The product management is going to have to speed up some of those cycles of getting user feedback and all that stuff. We're going to be able to speed some of that up, which I think is awesome. So anyway, that's just my take on the AI tools and kind of how things are moving. Thanks for joining Dan on Dev. Click the subscribe buttons, helps me be reminded to keep recording these things. And thank you for your time.